9:20 a.m., September 11, 2001. As the World Trade Center burned, standing in its last moments while Flight 77 was on its course for the Pentagon and Flight 93 having already departed Newark Airport, Federal Aviation Administration just ordered the airspace closed, and at John F. Kennedy Airport, United Airlines Flight 23 was ready to depart.
As bad as things were on Tuesday, there is a possibility that they could have been even worse. Tim Mitten of our flagship station, WNBC-TV here in New York, has some disturbing information. Tim, good morning to you.
Good morning, Matt. It was about the time that the first attacks on the World Trade Center were starting, and at JFK Airport, which has not previously been connected to any of the outgoing flights, just before 9 o'clock, United Flight 23, scheduled to depart for Los Angeles, was boarding. There was some kind of an altercation involving three men described by a Port Authority of New York and New Jersey police source as Middle Eastern in appearance. Somehow, the source will not reveal the exact details. They attracted the suspicions of the gate staff boarding that flight. The staff had some kind of a verbal exchange and demanded that these three men leave the aircraft. The men...
They had already gotten on the plane.
They're on the plane. It's very close to departure. The scheduled departure time was 9 o'clock. As you and the viewers know at this point, the first attack on the World Trade Center was just 15 minutes before. So as they're boarding the flight, the attack is either about to happen or has just happened, but nobody knows about it. And certainly nobody knows that airplanes are involved. So what happens then is they're asked to leave the aircraft. They refuse to get off. The airline, following its normal procedures, according to this police source, calls the police, which immediately dispatch an emergency service team. So now you have a squad of heavily armed officers that are coming toward the airplane. And when they get there, the men have vanished. The gate staff can't find them, and clearly what the employees were trying to do was get them off the plane. So the fact that they had slipped away may not be as big a surprise.
A couple of the disturbing facts here. One, this is a flight from JFK to Los Angeles, so it matches with the type of flights, the transcontinental flights that were hijacked in the other four instances. Another disturbing fact, if indeed there was an altercation and these men felt they had a case to make and were being treated unfairly, you can't imagine they would have disappeared from the airport. They would have stayed around and pled their case with the police.
And there two other disturbing things in addition to that. The first is, you know from, and viewers would know from their experience traveling, it is extraordinarily unusual to have an airline, after it has boarded passengers, be so suspicious that it's going to ask these customers to get off the airplane. That said, it would be equally unusual, if you will, for passengers in that situation not to at least get up, go to the gate, have the conversation that you're describing. To sit in your seat, to be so determined, unusual.
You reported this story on WNBC-TV here in New York, and I understand were contacted after the airing of that story.
We got a phone call from a law enforcement officer who was on vacation, was in the United Airlines terminal at the time. He said at the time he didn't add it all up, but seeing the report and of course having seen what happened in New York and elsewhere afterwards, he decided at that point he needed to contact his supervisors. Essentially what he saw was, he's in the United terminal. It's just after 9 o'clock. The attacks have happened. The television set in the bar in the terminal is on. As you can imagine, people about to fly, anybody indeed, would have been transfixed by those events. So now NBC and others are reporting the second attack just after 9 o'clock. He says the entire terminal was riveted to these television sets at the bar in one corner, except two men who were sitting off to the side, as he described it on the phone last night, appearing to him, veteran police officer, as being way too cool. So he walked over out of curiosity. He says he heard them speaking a language he could not identify. He doesn't know what the language was, but it wasn't English. And he says as he approached, they looked over, they saw him coming over. He says he then saw Port Authority police who were perhaps searching. In any event, they were running. He said he got close enough to hear that the men were talking in raised tones. He described it as a stern conversation, the way you might have, he said, with your wife if you were angry but you didn't want people around to hear that you were having a fight with your wife. He said as soon as he approached, they walked out of the terminal and he looked over. He described them as Middle Eastern in both appearance and dress. Not sure what that means, but that was his description. He said when they left the terminal through the glass doors, he saw them meet a third man, and they then left. He didn't see how. Now, same three men? Who knows? But it was the same terminal, clearly at the same time, because he said the second attack had just happened on the television set, and he was walking over from that. It's certainly, at the very least, unsettling. The Port Authority police source said it's been referred to the FBI.
I mean, obviously, that you have to stop and think for a second here. Obviously, there's a lot of coincidental information here, and there's also a chance that people are being paranoid in the wake of these attacks. But at the very least, there are some disturbing similarities.
You can't jump to conclusions. But what's real is 3 men were asked to leave the airplane, and they refused, then vanished.
One interesting story after another is coming to light now as the days go by about events surrounding Tuesday. And Anthony Mason, you have a very good example of this in a story that came to light today.
Yeah, the Associated Press, Dan, is reporting, citing a law enforcement source, that the FBI is investigating whether an altercation which occurred at Kennedy Airport on Tuesday may in fact have been another aborted hijacking attempt. Now, this Tuesday incident occurred about 9 a.m., which was the same time, of course, the 2 planes slammed into the World Trade Center towers. Apparently, a United Airlines plane, Flight 23, bound for Los Angeles, was boarded. Passengers on board were told they were not going to take off. And 3 males traveling on this plane refused to disembark. The Associated Press says the argument with a member of the flight crew became so heated, the crew member called airport security. But by the time security got there, the 3 men had vanished. As I say, the FBI is reportedly now investigating this whole incident, which occurred at Kennedy Airport roughly at the same time as the other 2 attacks, and whether this, in fact, may have been a hijacking as well.
By 9:03 on Tuesday morning, September 11th, hijackers had flown 2 airliners into 2 of the tallest buildings in the world. Once United Airlines realizes the second plane is one of theirs, company dispatchers contact hundreds in their remaining fleet.
My attention was strictly on what's the security status of all the aircraft. So we instituted a procedure, which we still have today, for positive contact. Every 10 to 15 minutes, the dispatchers were talking to the crews to ascertain the cockpit was still secure, so we knew that we were in command of every airplane.
At Newark Airport, the pilot of United Flight 23 wasn't taking any chances. After speaking to company dispatchers, he keeps his transcontinental flight scheduled for LA on the ground. When the plane returns to the gate, it's reported that several unruly, allegedly Middle Eastern men rush from the plane, leaving their luggage behind. Inside the bags, officials find Al-Qaeda instruction sheets, but false IDs prevent investigators from ever locating the bag's true owners.
I maintain to this day that based on my personal belief and based on the events of that morning, the decision to halt airplanes in all likelihood probably precluded other attacks.
But you probably have not heard about United Flight 23.
That's right, a plane that was only minutes from being in the air on 9/11, a plane that some believe could have become a 5th missile. Jay Korf rejoins us live now from the Pentagon with this story. Jay?
Allison, we spoke with that flight's first officer, the co-pilot. We also spoke with an author who says that she uncovered a stunning revelation, that there were additional terrorists on that flight and on other planes on September 11th.
It's information the FBI will not confirm. You won't find it in the 9/11 Commission report. But a brigadier general and a former pilot are talking.
I don't think many people know about those men on board United 23 or about the items that were found.
And they went running off the airplane, never to be seen again. So, who knows?
On September 11th, Brigadier General Carol Timmons of the Delaware Air National Guard was co-piloting United Flight 23, heading from JFK to Los Angeles. But while in line to take off, air traffic controllers closed the airport and she received a dire message.
Hijackings. We've had hijackings. Secure the cockpit. Either land or get back to the terminal. So as we turn to taxi back, we can see the towers on fire. I can close my eyes and see it today. So it was horrendous. It's horrendous.
To add to her angst, she received a chilling call.
In the meantime, as we're taxiing back, flight attendant says, "Hey, I've got some very agitated men sitting in first class. They're very unhappy. Why aren't we taking off? Why aren't we taking off?"
But once at the gate, the men disappeared into the sea of people evacuating JFK.
There's the generally held belief that there were other planes out there.
Former commercial pilot Lynn Spencer wrote touching history, a minute-by-minute account of the air drama that unfolded on 9/11. She says high-ranking FAA officials and airport managers have confirmed to her that during a search of United Flight 23, box cutters and al-Qaeda documents were discovered in unclaimed bags.
It was believed by those who searched the plane and found these items that they were indeed hijackers on that flight.
Spencer says federal officials believe not just one, but several additional planes were carrying terrorists on September 11th. But since the FAA shut down U.S. airspace, those twisted minds never hit their targets.
I think we are all aware of how horrible September 11th was. Can we really imagine if another 8, 9, 10 planes had also been successful?
Besides for Flight 23, other planes and airports were found to have had similar items and suspicious activities reaching as far as Canada. Not only did U.S. officials suspect the hijackers had accomplices inside airport security, but sources even like Time magazine had believed that there may have been more teams intended to hijack 8 to 10 planes on 9/11. For those of you who may recognize previous films with the Israeli connections to the 1993 bombing and 9/11, or supposed mastermind Khalid Sheikh Mohammed's nephew, Ramzi Youssef, who fled to Pakistan after the bombing and later escaped an apartment fire in the Philippines, where he had left his laptop where authorities discovered the BOJINKA plot that called for hijacking 10 to 12 planes with explosives, striking the same New York targets and others, including Sears Tower and CIA headquarters in Langley, Virginia. It may seem that more than likely on September 11, 2001, the 4 planes involved in the attack that were airborne after the no-flight ban may have been just the beginning with these unaccounted attempts at JFK and other airports that may have served to fulfill the BOJINKA plot. And though the mission may seem to have been aborted at 9:08 a.m., while World Trade Center Building 7 came down at 5:20 p.m. untouched by an airliner on 9/11, the reactivation of the BOJINKA plot becomes more apparent by 9:13.
Now, as to the key question of who else is out there, this is what a senior government official tells NBC News today, that there is no way to know whether there was, in fact, another attack plan that wasn't carried off. Now, there have been all sorts of reports and speculation that there was a 5th plane because of reports of some kind of altercation between ticket agents at JFK Airport in New York and some stubborn people who were giving them difficulty, and then the Port Authority police had to be called in. That was being looked at as a possible abortive 5th attack because it was a problem that happened about the same time as the other planes took off. Senior officials say they don't believe that incident had anything to do with the terror attacks. However, they can't prove that they have everybody. They can't prove that they got all the hijackers. They cannot prove the negative at this point, that there's nothing else. So the top priority is identifying what they call their associates. They won't give us a number. There have been all sorts of numbers, maybe 40, maybe 50. They're not saying.
A couple of more points, Tom. A top U.S. official tells me that they have the names, the identities of more hijackers who are still at loose here in the United States and also overseas. According to this official, this is not over. The all clear has not been sounded. This is not the time to stand down. He said until the FAA can assure us that they can prevent all hijackings, we should not be certain that this is a safe situation for people here and abroad, U.S. targets. So they are very seriously pursuing others. They have names of people other than the 18 people already identified who went down with those planes. So they believe these guys are at large, and the FBI is responsible for finding them. Pete has been reporting on how well the FBI is doing in pursuing these leads. They have come remarkably far in just a few days, but it's not over.
We go now to Randall Pinkston live at Newark Airport, just across the Hudson in New Jersey. Randall?
Dan, as flight operations at airports resume, clearly the focus is also on security. CBS News just learned that about an hour and a half ago, at about 3:30 Eastern Time, Port Authority police detained 3 individuals in the departure area of American Airlines. We don't know why they were detained, but we do know that the police here were awaiting the arrival of FBI agents.
What that means, if there's a ground stop in the New York area, meaning that there are no flights allowed to take off in the New York area, and I'm also being told there's some FBI activity at those airports as well. So we're waiting to get more information on exactly what that situation is developing.
We want to tell you that the 3 New York airports, less than 8 hours after having been opened, have now been closed at the order of federal authorities. We are told that arrests have been made at JFK Airport, the international airport here in New York.
Jim Stewart reports from Washington that the detaining, if not outright arrests, of some people at John F. Kennedy Airport which set off a chain reaction, we believe, of shutting down JFK, LaGuardia, and Newark. Jim Stewart reports that there were 3 people detained, if not indeed arrested, at JFK for INS violations, Immigration Naturalization Service, of course. These are people who, it is alleged, do not have their proper papers, and where that leads, we do not know.
All this because of, as you say, FBI activity, and what it is that they moved in and arrested 4 men as they were boarding a flight from Kennedy Airport. Apparently, these men were on the FBI's watch list, and there is one report that they carried pilot's licenses and had some forged documents.
2 men detained at JFK Airport. The men, both Saudi Arabian nationals, first aroused attention when they presented tickets for a cross-country flight that were dated 9/11, Tuesday, the day that the flights were hijacked and crashed into the World Trade Center and the Pentagon. Investigators were called and began to question them. The men said they were airline pilots and presented pilot licenses. That aroused more suspicions because of the background of this story that you all already know. They've been taken to a police facility at Kennedy Airport. They are being questioned still. Earlier today, and authorities are wondering if these events may not fit together, and we may have some videotape of this. At LaGuardia Airport, there was a brief evacuation. 3 men were arrested, or I shouldn't say arrested, were taken into custody there to be detained and questioned when they showed up at the airport with baggage marked crew.
This is a Fox News alert. Fox News Channel has just learned that there has been an arrest today at John F. Kennedy Airport. Forgive me for reading from the computer, but a man carrying a false pilot's identification was arrested today at John F. Kennedy Airport.
Now, law enforcement sources are telling Fox News that JFK, at least 2 Saudi nationals were detained. They said that they were pilots and presented what agents believe were fake documents. We just heard a short bit ago from the police commissioner who said that at least one of them was carrying a false pilot's ID. Sources are telling us that there may have been an additional man at that location. At LaGuardia, 3 men were taken into custody after agents said that they tried to pose as crew members.
There have been a number of people detained over the last 2 or 3 hours at the airports with possibly fictitious identification, one of which I understand was in fact arrested. He had identification indicating he was a pilot. He attempted to clear security and he was stopped. The identification he had was in fact false. I understand he has been arrested. There are other people that have been detained. They have not yet been arrested, and they're being spoken to by the authorities.
The police commissioner says the man was stopped as he tried to get past security. 5 other people, some of them Arab nationals, have also been detained at New York City area airports. They're being questioned by the FBI and the Joint Terrorism Task Force.
7 people are in custody at 2 New York airports tonight. Reportedly, they produced pilot licenses which appear to be counterfeit.
Well, as investigators around the world and in the United States attempt to unravel this terrorist conspiracy, several people have been detained for questioning. And at New York's Kennedy Airport, at least 1 person was arrested today because he had a fake pilot ID, according to New York City police.
Yeah, we were asked to move twice, so this is our third location here at Kennedy tonight. Big news out of here. We want to bring you the latest news that there are 5 to 6 men being questioned at this hour by FBI, Customs, and NYPD for their possible role in an attempted serious security breach earlier this evening. It is because of that incident the FAA has grounded all flights in and out of the 3 major airports until further notice. The federal officials are mum on the incident, but Mayor Giuliani has told our Marcia Kramer that one of the 6 men allegedly presented a fake ID indicating he was a pilot as he and his party attempted to board an aircraft. That man was arrested. He and his friends were taken to a secret location here to be detained and questioned, and when we first learned of where they were, attempted to raise the mast of our CBS truck to bring you that story, we were threatened with being arrested if we revealed the location of that building.
10 people are in custody. These 10 people, 9 men and 1 woman, attempted in 2 separate incidents today, one at 4 o'clock at JFK Airport, the other as late as 7:30 tonight at LaGuardia, to board national flights, one a United Airline flight with open full fare tickets. They were armed with knives, carrying false identification, pilot certificates, and certificates from the Flight Safety International Flying School in Vero Beach, Florida, where federal authorities have told us 3 of the suspects from Tuesday's horror took their flying lessons.
There are currently 10 individuals in custody who were picked up at Kennedy Airport and LaGuardia Airport this afternoon. There was an incident at Kennedy Airport at approximately 4:15 this afternoon when 4 men were detained trying to board a United Airlines flight to Los Angeles. They had open tickets to various destinations in the United States. They had multiple fake identifications. They had knives, and they had flight certificates from Flight Safety International in Vero Beach. The individuals had originally been booked on a flight to Los Angeles from New York on Tuesday morning. That flight did not take off because it was canceled right after the attacks on the World Trade Center. And following the detention of the 4 men at Kennedy Airport, a female was also detained who was acting, we are told, by high sources in the government, in the state governments in New York State, was playing a supplementary role. And then between 7:30 and 8:15 this evening, 5 men were detained at LaGuardia Airport with the same MO, the same modus operandi as the incident at Kennedy Airport. Now, the reason I raise this again, aside from the obvious reasons that it is news that nobody we are aware of in the government has denied at the moment, nobody has come to us and said we're not telling a story which is incorrect.
One thing you cannot help wondering, based on this information, about what federal authorities clearly now believe was 2 new attempts to hijack planes and have change-off pilots, is what were the next targets? There is no more World Trade Center. Was it the Empire State Building, the UN, the federal building where the FBI has left its quarters because they felt it was a security risk? And then the second question you have to wonder was, along with, was there a Washington target? Was it going to be a White House this time, as the White House has already suggested they felt they were on a target list? What would have happened?
Senator Joe Biden, the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee in Washington. Senator Biden, you've heard these reports tonight?
I'm not sure which reports you're referring to.
I beg your pardon. I'm referring to the reports about the arrests at Kennedy and at LaGuardia Airport this afternoon. Have you heard them?
Yes. Yes, I have.
Did you hear them before we reported them?
The answer is I didn't hear about the arrest. I heard about the prospects of the arrest, yes.
And so you believe that do you believe that there is a continuing effort by some people to get at, in broad language, the United States tonight, and the details of these reports today are accurate, and therefore, how worried should the country be?
I think that there will be and are people who will attempt to continue to get at the country. I do not believe that the prospect of that occurring is very high for 2 reasons. One, I think you're talking about, in effect, the second team. And secondly, I think that the focus is increasingly on how these folks basically, in effect, get out of town. So I do think there's some concern. And I think you're, in addition to that, Peter, going to get an awful lot of the screwballs who aren't any part of any organization, doing everything from something crazy aboard an aircraft, or, for example, we evacuated the darn Capitol today. We evacuated based on a bomb scare. And so I think you're going to see a lot of that for a while.
What leads you, Senator, to say that these arrests at Kennedy and LaGuardia today may have been the second team?
I don't think I can respond to that.
Did you mean to infer by the second team that these were the sort of second-rank characters?
I think it's less organized, less lethal, less capable.
You base that?
I'm really on kind of thin ice here, and I'm concerned about making sure that I don't say anything that leads someone as bright as you to ask me the next question and put me in a spot of potentially revealing things I shouldn't reveal.
Well, in fairness, Senator, we're all on thin ice around here, and I think we both appreciate that. And secondly, I think it should be pointed out that in detaining these people at these two airports tonight, the security apparatus indeed appears to have worked in this instance. I would like to know whether or not you were briefed about this as the chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee before you got to hear it in the press.
No.
Okay. Do you have confidence currently in the intelligence services of the United States?
Yes, to the extent that, let me back up. Okay. I think we are woefully underfunded the intelligence community. We have woefully underfunded and focused on the human intelligence. And I have been a pain in the neck to everybody around here, along with Senator Graham of Florida and a few others, arguing that we should be putting considerably more resources into the intelligence side and the human side of this. But I think the intelligence community, as strapped as they are in relative terms, is doing a pretty good job. It's not sufficient.
I understand that, sir, and I don't for a second wish to be melodramatic. But do you believe that the United States tonight may be, in some form, still under attack?
I do not believe it's still under attack.
And did you believe...
In the same sense that we were under attack on the 11th.
Do you know, sir, why Vice President Cheney was removed to Camp David?
No.
Do you believe that the airlines in the United States should be flying tonight? And I ask that question in the context of the reports that we told you about tonight from Kennedy and LaGuardia.
Based on the reports, as well as the subsequent briefings that I've had, I think they probably should. What is being done is prudent. That is, those who are flying, it is prudent, and I think that it is prudent to continue to escalate the number of flights that are available to be in the air.
But you do believe, sir, that the United States is not under attack and this crisis, in this immediate sense, is over?
From ABC 7 News, this is...
Police told reporters that a man carrying false identification papers and a pilot's license had attempted to clear security. New York's three major airports, Kennedy, LaGuardia and Newark, were briefly opened to flights and then closed down again as FBI agents began a search operation.
Yeah, Peter, exactly what one of my sources told me is that on Tuesday, 4 of these men showed up at JFK, attempted to board one of the flights, and were challenged at the ticket counter, according to my source. When they were challenged, they decided to leave and left very quickly. They left before the FBI could get there.
Do they still have some people in custody, Virginia?
Yes, Tom. Actually, you mentioned earlier, this is information according to New York's police commissioner. A man carrying false pilot's identification was arrested late this afternoon while trying to get through airport security here at JFK. Shortly after that, JFK was shut down. Only planes that were already in the air have been allowed to land. In addition to that, 5 to 6 others have been detained at New York airports for questioning. Some of those people, we are told, are Arab nationals. The questioning being conducted by members of the Joint Terrorist Task Force as well as the FBI.
New York, of course. Police arrested a man today at LaGuardia Airport and another at JFK Airport when he was caught with phony pilot credentials.
But I have talked to some government sources tonight, and what they are telling us is that there were discussions about the incidents between the government and the airlines. Folks are understandably concerned. I don't know if when those discussions took place they really had the level of detail about these incidents that we have been reporting tonight, but they certainly knew that people had been detained both at LaGuardia and JFK Airport.
Senior U.S. officials confirmed there have been some arrests of people who are being questioned in connection with Tuesday's terrorist attacks in New York and at the Pentagon. According to those officials, the arrests are only for immigration violations at this point. The arrest took place in New York this afternoon. Sources tell NBC News that at least 7 people were arrested at LaGuardia and JFK airports. Those sources say 4 of the men arrested were on board a U.S. Airlines flight with tickets from Tuesday, and they produced pilots' licenses that turned out to be counterfeit.
New York's LaGuardia Airport was evacuated tonight as people ran screaming in fear. As we first reported at 6, police arrested 3 men of Arab descent who were trying to board a plane carrying luggage that was marked crew. At Kennedy Airport, police detained 2 men carrying pilots' licenses and tickets for Tuesday's flight that crashed into the World Trade Center.
At least one confirmed arrest. The suspects may have been armed with knives, may have presented fake pilot's IDs, may have purchased one-way tickets. Was this a thwarted plan to hijack another American plane? A similar scenario may have played out at LaGuardia tonight, resulting in the immediate closure of all 3 airports.
Let's find out what's happening at LaGuardia. Let's check in with Pablo Guzman. Pablo.
Hi. You heard Jennifer McLogan just a little while ago talking about the situation at JFK. About an hour after things started to develop there, something began to happen here at LaGuardia, and some men were stopped, detained. They are still here being questioned. They had credentials on them, trying to pass themselves off apparently as members of a ground crew, but that didn't check out. And with people coming in with credentials that didn't check out, knowing what had just happened at JFK, you can imagine the concern here at LaGuardia. That happened around 4:30. You know what time it is now? Those folks are still in there being detained, not arrested. They have to be charged first, but the questioning goes on. And the questioning goes on because the authorities are wondering if this was not some sort of second wave. What happened at Kennedy, what's happened at LaGuardia, what may be happening elsewhere. A lot of the experts on this have felt all along that because the other side, if you will, sees that they are at war, what happened Tuesday, unfortunately, that's not the end of it. And if you have 5 cells, let's say, maybe there are 15 or 20 cells, some cells whose job perhaps it was to wait a couple of days and then try to make a move. It seems, though, that at Kennedy and at LaGuardia, that was thwarted.
At least 8 people were arrested at New York's LaGuardia and John F. Kennedy airports amid concerns over a threat of yet another hijacking. 4 of them had been challenged at one of the airports on Tuesday morning, came back to JFK tonight and were taken into custody. They are being held for carrying fake documents.
Well, Tom, throughout the day, the federal assessment of how serious the situation was in New York has been constantly changing. At first, we were told this was a minor problem, possibly some immigration difficulties. Then there were reports that these people had knives. Then we were told that wasn't the case. Let us say what we believe the situation to be now. A federal official tonight calls this a very significant development. Here's our understanding. 2 separate groups, for a total of 10 people, 2 separate groups tried to board 2 transcontinental airplanes tonight, late this afternoon, one around 5, one around 7. One at LaGuardia Airport just across from Manhattan, one at JFK Airport. And both were stopped from eventually getting on those planes, and of course then air traffic was halted in the area. Now, we're told that members of both of these groups tried to board the airplanes using falsified documents, claiming to be, for example, airline pilots or employees of the airport. Now, the immediate question it raises is, was this another attempt, or 2 more attempts, to hijack domestic airliners and stage more suicide attacks? That is a question federal officials cannot answer tonight. But after first saying this didn't appear to be very significant, now they say it is. They're obviously very worried about this. It's obvious they're worried about it from the fact that they closed down the New York airports.
Latest information, as many as 10 people being held by the FBI in New York tonight for allegedly attempting to board, and in some cases actually boarding aircrafts with false identification, carrying weapons such as knives, indications that some of them had attended the Flight Safety International Training School in Vero Beach, the same school that helped train some of those who became as authorities suspect, the pilots who took over the controls of the planes on Tuesday. Federal authorities believe at this hour that the intention of one team at Kennedy Airport and another arrested later at 7:30 this evening at LaGuardia Airport with similar equipment and false identification, that their intention was to continue the pattern that started on Tuesday by attempting to hijack those airplanes. And because some of those picked up tonight apparently had training to fly commercial aircrafts, along with the 10 who were arrested, there were, we are told, 9 men and 1 woman. The woman was not someone who boarded the plane as part of the team of 4 and 5. She was arrested, according to authorities, in some kind of support role.
Terry, I gather that the administration has been reluctant to give any information on this story, but what can you tell us at this late hour?
That is putting it mildly, Ted. The White House in particular is being very, very careful with this story. One of the missions right now that the president has is try to reassure the country. This is obviously an unsettling story, and they are staying away from it. I do, however, have from one White House official the confirmation that the president is being continually updated on this situation, and he's aware of it.
Is the White House refusing to confirm or deny the story? Is the administration refusing to confirm or deny the story of those arrests that were made at JFK and LaGuardia? Or are you at least getting some off-the-record guidance?
Well, we are getting guidance, being told that the president is being continually updated and is aware of the situation. Most officials I reached, frankly, were not aware of it. They had not heard it until I told it to them. When they got back to me, I got a flat, we aren't touching that. But we did get from one official this word that the president has been made aware of this.
Much of what is dominating the night's news is what has happened at 2 New York airports this evening. Mr. Hunter, tell me what you saw, tell me what you experienced.
We were on at the gate for about 2 hours. We boarded about an hour late. It was a 4 o'clock flight. It was supposed to be the first flight on a regular scheduled basis for American to go out to LAX today. And we boarded about an hour late, and then we sat on the plane for about 2 hours, or maybe a bit more than that. And then near the end, the captain came on, was trying to make, walking through the aisles, trying to make everybody calm down. He was talking to me and a few other passengers and was asked forcibly by the his first mate or his other captain to go to the front of the plane.
The first officer.
Exactly. And at that point, he ultimately came back on the air and told everybody that we were going to go, and we were all very happy and feeling very good that we were going to be able to get home and see our families and stuff. But about 10 minutes later, the door was still open, which is unusual, and literally a few minutes after that, about 20 or more police officers, many in SWAT gear with large guns, all unholstered and looking down the aisles, screaming at everybody to go and hit the floor, and we all hit the floor. And meanwhile, there was a commotion going on behind me, about 4 or 5 rows behind me, where they were subduing a passenger. And he was definitely resisting and trying to fight off, but it was obviously worthless given how many policemen were on the airplane. And then 2 other passengers that were right in front of me were ultimately asked to go with authorities as well. They were taken to a galley, handcuffed, and then led off the plane from the front as well. So there was quite a bit of commotion, followed by dogs and looking for bombs and everything else before they would allow us to get off the plane.
New York airports, having been opened early in the day, then were closed rather suddenly. LaGuardia, JFK, and Newark later in the day. Among the things that happened is a man who tried to use a fake pilot's identification to get past security at John F. Kennedy International Airport was arrested. 5 other people were detained. We understand some of those people were detained because they did not pass the test of the Immigration Service.
Jim Olson was at Kennedy Airport tonight when there was an altercation. Describe the person that they took off the airplane, if you can.
Couldn't really. We heard a lot of kicking and screaming and bustling. There were some accents that I couldn't really make out, some foreign language, but clearly they took somebody off board. We were in sort of a crash position, so you couldn't really see things clearly, other than at least a half dozen people sort of storm by you.
And where was this person sitting in the plane?
They were in the front section of coach.
And they did take off more than one, you think?
I know they took off at least one, and then we were talking to some folks afterwards in the luggage carousel area that they were sitting right next to the folks that were extracted, and they said there were 2 women and 1 gentleman of Middle Eastern descent that they think were pulled off.
At New York's LaGuardia Airport, police detained at least 2 other men for questioning. After the spate of arrests and detentions, all New York area airports were closed again.
Mike, I want to just make it very clear here. What has gone on at the airports? Were these people actually trying to board airplanes using pilot's identification? What were they trying to do?
Well, the one person had the pilot's identification. It's not completely clear right now. He was in the airport. We're not sure if he was trying to get on the plane. We do know the other 7 people who were arrested for having false documentation, for example, or not being in the country legally. They were trying to get on those aircraft to make flights, and what raised red flags was the fact that they had open-ended tickets, no set return date.
A man who tried to use a fake pilot's identification to get past security at John F. Kennedy International Airport has been arrested, and 5 other people have been detained at city airports by the FBI and Joint Terrorist Task Force. The incident about this man who used a fake pilot's identification to get past security caused the 3 major New York airports to close again Thursday shortly after they'd opened. The airports remained closed as we went into the early hours of Friday. Now, a source quoted by the Associated Press as being, quote, knowledgeable of the workings of the airline industry said the man was arrested at Kennedy Airport. That man was checked in sometime between noon and 4 p.m. today. The man was trying to board American Airlines Flight 299 bound for San Jose, California. The man had been scheduled for an earlier flight on Tuesday bound for Los Angeles. Now, we reported this incident before this evening. But that flight, the one on Tuesday, which was due to take off around 9 o'clock in the morning, New York time, the flight was canceled after the terrorist attack began on the World Trade Center. Now, a subsequent strip search of this man is said to have found a pilot certificate from a Florida school.
2 groups of people were taken from New York's LaGuardia and Kennedy Airport. Both, according to law enforcement sources, were trying to apparently fake their way on to transcontinental commercial flights. One of the worst theories was that it was trying to be attempted again, that perhaps it was 2 more groups of would-be hijackers. For whatever reason, the 2 groups detained, we have heard nothing on their whereabouts or disposition. There were armed guards visible on the roof of JFK Airport. And earlier this evening, we spoke with a passenger who was on an American Airlines flight loaded up and ready to fly from New York's JFK to Los Angeles LAX, and he picks up the story seated in the rear of the airplane tonight.
It starts with trying to get home to Los Angeles after being in New York for at least 2 weeks about now.
And you're trying to get on a commercial flight, and what happens?
I was on American's Flight 133 bound for LA, which is supposed to be the first American flight to leave JFK at 4 o'clock this afternoon. We sat on the tarmac for about 3 hours to 4 hours. They finally cleared us to leave the gate. And next thing we know, there were at least probably half a dozen to a dozen SWAT team armed SWAT team, gunmen that stormed through the back of the plane. They had us put our heads into crash position, and they dragged out at least one potential terrorist, and we think as many as 3.
Wow. Now you're sitting there with a partial plane load, full plane load worth of passengers waiting to go to Los Angeles. And given the climate right now, actually you're on the ground in a city where the World Trade Center is gone. That must have scared the hell out of everybody.
Well, Ted, tonight the FBI and officials at LaGuardia and also JFK stopped a total of 10 people, 9 men and 1 woman. And we're told by sources that they were armed with knives. They also had false identification. Also, we're told that they had flight instruction information similar to those of the attackers who flew the attacks earlier this week, Ted. So the theory and the fear is that they were about to mount more attacks today. The FBI, we're told by sources tonight, continue to look for additional associates. Also, there's a possibility, some officials are very concerned that there could be additional hijackers planning more attacks, Ted.
Well, 4 men detained at Kennedy Airport were picked up after they boarded a United Airlines jet bound for Los Angeles. As we mentioned a few minutes ago, they were carrying fake IDs, knives, and flight training certificates. And Peter Black was a passenger on the plane at the time. He talked later with ABC's Peter Jennings.
We got on the plane late. We sat on the plane. We were forced to wait for a while. They didn't tell us anything. They told us there were government regulations keeping us there. Finally, after about 2.5 hours, they told us we were finally okay. And then about 15 minutes after that, the back door of the plane opened, and about, it's hard to say, 15 to 20 fully armed SWAT team members filed in. They told us all to put our heads down, and they ran through the plane, grabbed a passenger, handcuffed him, and carried him out.
And how many passengers did they take off in that condition?
From the main cabin, I only saw them take out 1. Afterwards, we heard they took 2 out from business class as well.
Okay, I believe, in fact, in the final analysis, there were 4 men who were taken off 133, which was scheduled for Los Angeles. And I assume that you and your fellow passengers were pretty shaken up.
Yeah, you could say that, yeah. More than that, I think.
Where are you this evening?
I'm at home, thank you.
In New York City?
In Brooklyn, yeah.
In Brooklyn, but you were trying to go to Los Angeles.
Yes, a mistake.
And in this frightened city, there are newer security worries. At New York airports, men were arrested when they tried to board planes. Some are Arabs.
A security crackdown at 2 of New York City's major airports has resulted in at least 8 arrests. All were booked as passengers on flights from Kennedy or LaGuardia airports on Thursday. Law enforcement sources tell CNN the group includes at least 4 people who were seen at one of the airports on the day of the attacks. They say the 4 were taken into custody for carrying fake documentation, including one man who was posing as a pilot.
All over JFK, we see police with shotguns. Some of those police officers posted on top of airport headquarters of police. And they've moved in heavy construction equipment to block entrances to that building. Inside that building, police are questioning several people they took into custody, some believed to be Saudi nationals. Police have arrested one man who posed as a Delta pilot and carried a fake ID badge. He was trying to get on a flight, and sources say he had a ticket dated Tuesday. And also, we're told that some of the men were carrying knives. And at LaGuardia Airport, 3 men were taken into custody after agents say they tried to pose as crew members. One last thing tonight. Police are investigating an altercation at JFK here on Tuesday. There was a 9 a.m. flight to Los Angeles. 3 men became angry when the flight was canceled. Security had to be called. And by the time security got here, those 3 men had disappeared.
In yet another development, authorities have arrested at least 8 people at the city's 2 major airports, one carrying a fake pilot's license. Authorities say that 4 of those arrested were seen at one of the airports the day of the attacks. Law enforcement sources tell CNN the 4 fled that day as they were challenged at the ticket counter.
As airports opened across the country, police were watching closely. A total of 8 people were arrested at 2 of New York's airports. At New York's Kennedy Airport, one man who was carrying a fake pilot ID was arrested. 4 or 5 other people trying to check in for flights at Kennedy were detained for questioning, either because they were carrying false documents or were in the country illegally.
At New York's LaGuardia and Kennedy airports, police detained 10 suspicious passengers, all foreign nationals. Sources tell ABC News they were carrying knives, fake IDs, pilot licenses, or certificates for flight school.
10 men detained at New York airports are being questioned. Another with a false pilot's identification is under arrest.
The investigation also heating up. Last night at JFK Airport, flights canceled and passengers evacuated. Authorities arrest a man who reportedly presented a fake pilot's ID and tried to pass through security.
Yesterday, police detained 2 teams of armed suspects in New York. The Washington Post reports both groups had knives, fake IDs, and open airline tickets dated Tuesday. That's the day of the terrorist attacks. They also had certificates from a flight training school in Florida. One suspect has been charged for having a false pilot's ID.
New York's LaGuardia Airport police took 3 men of Arab descent into custody after they were attempting to board a plane carrying luggage marked crew. And at Kennedy Airport, police detained 2 men carrying pilot's licenses.
There was an incident on an American Airlines flight yesterday. It was headed to Los Angeles. 3 people were taken off at gunpoint by police who secretly boarded using a catering cart. They were taken off the flight. Now, security here is incredibly tight at this point, and as you mentioned, there are published reports saying that some of the people detained, among the 10, were carrying flight certificates from the same Florida flight training school attended by some of Tuesday's hijackers. If you look at the video that we are showing you, you can see police sniper on the building of the Port Authority police building, and also police surrounding that area, keeping people out. The FBI and the Joint Terrorist Task Force are on site. They are questioning the detainees, and there were also other incidents here. Meanwhile, yesterday afternoon also, apparently the FBI was investigating an altercation on a United flight also bound for Los Angeles, and when asked to leave the plane, the FBI boarded and asked everyone to leave the plane. A couple of people refused, 2 to 3 people. Actually, when security asked people to board, police were called, and by the time they arrived, those people had vanished.
Authorities in New York City shut down all 3 airports again last night after as many as 10 people were detained in connection with Tuesday's attacks. Police at Kennedy Airport arrested a man trying to get past security with a fake pilot's ID. As many as 9 others were detained at Kennedy and at New York's LaGuardia Airport. Officials say 2 groups tried to board 2 separate flights. There are reports that some of them were carrying knives and false identification. Shocked passengers at LaGuardia watched as police boarded their plane.
A whole slew of about 20 policemen came on. Several in SWAT gear, others that were just, Port Authority police with pistols, all guns out and blaring, but not. And we all were told to put our heads down. And they, meanwhile, were wrestling this guy in the back, and they dragged him off. And there were a couple people sitting right in front of me. They also asked them to come off. They handcuffed them and took them with them.
But there is more news, perhaps, well, indeed, it seems likely, that there were more hijackings planned, hijackings for yesterday, and John Miller has details on those.
Charlie, that's exactly what federal authorities believe. They believe that 2 teams tried to infiltrate airport security, and one of them almost did successfully, both at JFK Airport and LaGuardia. JFK Airport at 4:15 yesterday, there was a group of men and 1 woman arrested, some of them taken off a flight bound for Los Angeles. Then later last night at 7:30, another group, this one all male, arrested at LaGuardia Airport. Authorities who had their names on watch lists were notified by the airlines that these people were on the passenger manifest. When they searched them, they found pilot's license, false identification, reportedly knives. And what really set off alarm bells is more than one of them had attended a Safety International Flight Training School, the Vero Beach Flight School, that was attended by at least 3 of the hijackers who were involved in Tuesday's mayhem.
And we said earlier, some of them had indications from their tickets that they were going to be on flights on Tuesday, so they could have been additional operations on Tuesday.
They were booked for Tuesday, so all indicators are whatever it was they were trying to do yesterday, they were supposed to do by plan on Tuesday. Yet the minute airspace was reopened, they showed right back up at the airport and tried to get on flights.
Now, John, as we're going to find out in a moment, the American Airlines flight at Kennedy, where SWAT teams went on board and took 3 people off the plane and put them under arrest. That was a flight bound for Los Angeles, a West Coast flight, the same kind of flight, cross-country flight, 4 of which were hijacked on Tuesday.
Let me ask you this, though, the big question. As you're talking to all the sources, and you have phenomenal sources on this, as we know, are they saying to you, this is not over? There are more of them out there. Stand by. Anything could happen any moment?
Yesterday, before this, they were indicating to me that based on the materials they'd gone through, the names, the associations they made, they felt that they had a universe of 40 potential hijackers. Now, you had 18 involved with these first 4 flights, 10 yesterday. By their math, that leaves the potential that there are 10 more. That would have added up, if you sparse the teams evenly, to 8 flights. So we had 4, then the indicators that there was an attempt to bring that to 6.
At Kennedy.
Well, imagine you were one of the people on board the plane heading for Los Angeles, heading for the West, and suddenly police come on board and you think, oh no, here it is, it's happening again. Well, we're joined now by Jim Hunter, who was a passenger on one of the flights stormed by a SWAT team.
We all got in our seats, and about 20 minutes later, we were wondering what's going on. Then suddenly there was a commotion behind us as the police had stormed in from the back of the airplane and had converged on right around row 19 of the plane, which was a few rows behind me, to basically secure a passenger that was back there. There was a lot of yelling and screaming and kicking as I looked around, and
yelling, the passenger yelling in English, or?
No, not in English, and he was definitely a foreigner.
Did he resist?
He was absolutely resisting. He was kicking, he was screaming, he was very unhappy with the situation, obviously. Based on what I was seeing. But I also turned around back to the front pretty quickly, because right at that point there were 15, 20 additional police officers coming at us in full SWAT gear with the helmets on and the rifles and pistols and the whole 9 yards, and trying to secure the airplane as quickly as possible.
Give you any explanation for what happened?
No, they didn't. The police dogs came on, sniffed around, and ultimately the captain came back on and told us that we should just collect our things and get off the plane. Obviously, we weren't going to go anywhere that night.
Late yesterday afternoon, arrest at least 8 people, reports as many as 10 at JFK and LaGuardia. And, they were unsure whether these people that were arrested were trying to flee the New York area or if they actually had plans to undertake another hijacking.
There have been 10 people, approximately 10 people arrested at the airports. At LaGuardia Airport, there have been 5 to 6 people arrested, and at JFK Airport, there have been 3 to 4 people arrested, and one of them is a woman. These people have been reported to carry knives and flying manuals and false IDs, and one man, at least one man, had tried to get on an airplane using a false ID of a pilot. Now, these people have been questioned by authority, and they are suspected of trying to carry out another hijack activity. When one of the New York reporters, local TV station reporters, interviewed an Israeli man stranded at JFK Airport waiting to go home to Israel, the young Israeli said on TV, "Now the Americans can finally feel what we have always felt like." And a man sitting next to me watching this TV, an American man said, "Well, if not for you, we wouldn't have to feel this way."
Matt, good morning to you. Federal officials are intensively investigating this disturbing new development after 2 small groups of people, some of them possibly carrying knives, tried to board 2 airplanes, 2 transcontinental flights, late Thursday in New York using falsified documents. No sooner had air travel slowly started up Thursday when authorities suddenly stopped it at New York's 3 main airports late in the afternoon. Officials picked up a total of 10 people in 2 separate groups, one at LaGuardia, the other at JFK Airport. Officials say members of the 2 groups tried to use falsified identification documents, posing as pilots and airline employees to board 2 long flights bound for the West Coast. Some officials said a few carried knives, but federal authorities said that wasn't the case. But even so, investigators called it a very significant development, possibly even renewed attempts at terrorist hijackings. Extensive questioning of the 10 lasted well into the night, and the FBI is likely to have more to say about it today. Now, a key question is how many of those hijackers' supporters are still at large?
Most of us that have looked at this situation believe that there had to be some significant level of ground support and assistance to those who were involved in actually perpetrating this crime and ending their lives.
Federal officials have been saying for 2 days that they knew of no other planned attacks, but one official tells NBC News it would be foolish to think that Tuesday's 4 hijackings were to be the end of it.
As he reported, officials detained 10 people Thursday as they tried to board 2 separate flights. Jim Olsen was on one of those planes and when it was stormed by SWAT teams. Jim, good morning.
Good morning, Katie.
It must have been pretty terrifying.
Yeah, it was surreal. I mean, it was, on the one hand, you sort of felt like you were an extra in a bad movie, but then at the same time, it was surreal. You didn't really know what to think, and then it finally sort of hit you that these were potentially terrorists that were on your flight, and it finally sort of you finally realize it finally touches you, or this whole event reaches out to anyone, not just folks who live in New York.
Were you able to look at the individuals who were taken off the plane? I understand you thought there was one initially and learned later that there were 3, but could you see at least the one?
Yeah, I mean, I saw just sort of out of the corner of my eye, at least one sort of person. It was very difficult because we all had our heads down and it was hard to see, and I could hear one distinctive voice that was definitely trying to resist on the way out. But
I was going to ask you, was there a struggle or did they go?
It sounded like there was. But they were all very precise. I mean, you could definitely tell that the SWAT team was very precise and had laser focus in terms of what they were doing, and it was all very professional, and the crew kept everyone very calm, and the passengers were all very, very calm as well. So certainly there weren't people screaming and running down the aisles or anything like that.
You must have felt, I mean, after they left, after they were taken off the plane, what happened then?
Well, then they had us actually sit back up, and when we looked up, there were SWAT team members basically positioned throughout the plane at that point, and they basically went through all the upper luggage carousels, searching for this passenger, these passengers, pieces of luggage that they had brought on, and that process lasted for about 15 minutes. These people.
But is it pretty clear to you that these were people who might have been involved in something similar as to what happened on Tuesday morning? I mean, you don't want to necessarily jump to conclusions, but is it fairly clear to you that this was trouble?
I mean, clearly these people had some threat, because if they put this, there were at least half a dozen to a dozen agents that stormed. So again, I don't want to speculate on what their level of involvement was, but it was clearly something that was important enough to the police to take this kind of action.
Potential hijackers were removed from planes. They apparently, according to reports, had knives, false identification, and, this is the important part, open tickets that were left over from Tuesday, East Coast to West Coast, including Los Angeles destinations, and certificates from a Florida flight training school attended by the members of the previous hijacking teams who were similarly armed, who commandeered those aircrafts. Among the people on board yesterday afternoon, evening, an American Airlines flight out of Kennedy Airport, Jim Olsen, who joins us now live this morning. Jim, good morning to you. What exactly did you see?
Well, it all happened very fast. I looked over my shoulder, and there were half a dozen FBI SWAT team members standing there, and within probably about 2 seconds, they ordered us to put our heads down in a crash position, and they stormed through the plane. And we could hear them dragging out at least one person, and I learned later there was probably about 3 people that they ended up taking out.
Was there any resistance that you could tell, and what language was being used?
Well, you could definitely hear, I heard at least one distinctive male voice. I don't want to really speculate on the ethnicity of it, but it was clearly not English.
Where was this person sitting that they took off?
In the front of the coach cabin, from what I could tell.
Any idea how he was dressed?
No idea.
When you were standing around getting ready to board that flight, and indeed maybe as you were boarding it, were you kind of looking around at people a little apprehensive about who was on board your flight with you?
Not really. I think at that point, because we had been kept at bay in the waiting area for an extra hour, we actually didn't board the plane till about 5:15 or 5:30, which was over an hour after we were scheduled to depart. So I think at that point, everyone was just very excited and anxious to get on our way.
Look, Jim, you know what might have almost happened to your plane flight and your plane. I mean, this was a plane that was supposed to take off apparently on Tuesday, and it was canceled when all air traffic was grounded after the first attacks. I mean, it may very well have been that yesterday yet another terrorist attack was foiled, and you were right in the middle of it.
Additional details have just emerged. We've had access to someone who has been over an extensive debriefing of one of the crew on that plane. And according to the member of the crew, they were all gathered in the waiting area to board the flight. There were airline employees flying non-revenue, deadheading they call it, just taking the plane back to their base in LAX. There was also an individual there who had an LAX ID card. They didn't have enough crew to fill out the plane, so they were asking some of the crew members who were off duty if they would work the flight, and most of them just said that they were just too exhausted to do it and too emotionally unprepared because of what they had been through because of the deaths of their friends on the other plane. And at that point, they say, this gentleman stepped forward, flashed an LAX ID card and said, well, you know, I'll crew this flight. You know, I work on the LA end. And the LAX people didn't recognize him. They thought it was odd, but not so much at the time. And eventually, enough crew did show up, and then he was given a passenger seat instead of a crew seat. But then it turns out when a SWAT team stormed the plane, and the FBI agents moved in and identified the people that they suspected as hijackers and associates of the other hijackers, this gentleman was one of them. So an indication that among the false IDs he was carrying, there was the false ID of an airline crew employee, and that he was attempting to take a position on the plane where he might have access to the cockpit and essentially the run of the ship.
10 people arrested at JFK and LaGuardia earlier overnight, actually, suspected that they were part of the original plot and may have been trying to follow up with another series of terrorist attacks.
Let's move on now to New York, and the police there have arrested one man and detained several others who were trying to board flights at Kennedy and LaGuardia airports. They were using fake ID papers, as we just heard, including a false pilot's license. And Jim Hunter was a passenger on a flight which was raided by a U.S. SWAT team.
There was a gentleman that was in row 8 right in front of me that they took into custody as well. And the woman with the headphones that was in front of me, one of the other passengers pointed out that she had actually boarded the plane with the other gentleman that they took into custody. He did not resist. He went very quietly. But they took her into custody as well. So I saw in 3 that they took 3 people into custody.
Well, we do know that some of the people that were detained in New York last night have actually been released. They've been cleared. They've been released from questioning. The arrests in New York last night, one man arrested now. We know the others were released. One man arrested, still detained because he was arrested by local authorities, we're being told by the Department of Justice.
At New York's LaGuardia Airport, this was just one of the arrests. Here and at JFK, 8 men were seized by police. At least one was reportedly carrying a fake pilot's license. Some apparently had penknives. Most worrying of all, 5 of those seized in the 2 police swoops were identified as the same men who had tried to board a plane close to the time of Tuesday's hijackings. Then they were turned away and fled.
There's some breaking news to report for that. Let's turn to our justice correspondent, NBC's Pete Williams. Pete?
Hey to you. We can now say that the crisis has passed at New York's 3 airports, Newark, LaGuardia, and JFK, which were very abruptly shut down yesterday afternoon after a series of, we can now say, remarkable coincidences that caused officials there to overreact. It's probably safe to say, but it's probably also safe to say understandably overreact given the situation. Now, here is what we now know. 2 separate incidents, unrelated, but both oddly coincidental. In the first incident, a man who is an actual legitimate pilot boarded an airplane, tried to board an airplane. They checked his identification. Everything was fine, but he also was carrying identification for his brother. I'm not sure why, but he was carrying an ID for his brother. Now, here's where the odd coincidence comes in. That brother at one time lived at a Boston address, which was also at one time the address for some suspected associates of known terrorists. Let me go through that again. The pilot is carrying legitimate identification for himself, but also for his brother. His brother at one time lived at an address in Boston that at some other time was also an address for associates of known terrorists. So that set off all kinds of alarms. Then, shortly after that, 9 other people, so we're dealing with a total of 10 people here, 2 separate incidents. 9 other people try to board an airplane with stickers or tags on their luggage that strike airport officials as odd because they think that these people are trying to masquerade as airline employees, when in fact it turns out these people were all legitimate passengers who were trying to go to a conference put on by the Boeing Corporation. Boeing, of course, the big jet manufacturer, made the 2 jets that were involved, the 2 kinds of jets that were involved in Tuesday's suicide crashes, the 757 and 767. You put all this together, an ID issue, the people that it appears to airline employees are trying to masquerade as airline employees. That's what the airport officials think. They blow the whistles, they shut down the airport, they question these people extensively, but now they're satisfied it was all a false alarm, and as I say, an overreaction, but an understandable one. But they're satisfied that the situation at JFK and LaGuardia is now totally resolved. There were no weapons. They're satisfied now, they say, that this was not an attempt to hijack these planes.
First, let's start with what happened in New York. There have been a lot of reports overnight last night about some detained people in New York at the airport. Tell us what you know.
What I know is to be factual, and last night I couldn't say this on air. Those people have no connection whatsoever to what happened at the World Trade Towers or the Pentagon or this organization and network. 2 things happened, Kate. One guy, an actual pilot, got on the plane, coincidentally had his brother's identification as well. His brother happened to live in an apartment complex that was one in Boston where some of these people had actually been. Totally coincidental. 10 other people were going to a Boeing conference. They had stickers on their bags. They worked for Boeing or were invited by Boeing. I'm not sure the detail. The folks at the airport thought, hey, wait a minute, are they impersonating crew? And they weren't. One guy was arrested and detained, and it was a screwball who was acting out. Was acting out, just saying and demanding. I'm not sure exactly what he was doing, demanding to get on, making problems, and they arrested him. All the rest of these people have been released. There is no connection whatsoever. Now, what happened was, because we're all on such high alert here, they closed down all those airports until they knew that was the case.
But you're confident that
I'm
that's the
confident.
case.
I'm confident that I've spoken to the director of the FBI, the number 2 guy. I've spoken to the CIA and George Tenet. This was 6 o'clock this morning, as late as 6:30 this morning, which is an hour and a half ago, or whatever. Last night when I was responding to another program, was I aware of what was going on? I thought they were talking about investigations of baggage handlers, of people at airports, etc. That is thoroughly, we have 7,000 FBI agents out there combing the countryside, and you will see other arrests. But one thing people should understand, there is no evidence that there were people trying to get on a plane to duplicate what happened at the Pentagon or in Pennsylvania or in the state of New York.
Will we see a declaration from this Congress tomorrow declaring support for force?
What you may see is as early as today.
At earliest today?
You may see it as early as today,
okay,
Kate.
Thank you,
I'm
Senator.
going in to present it now.
Well, Michael, as we've been reporting since early this morning, police, FBI, and U.S. Marshals here are questioning 5 men who were taken into custody, quote-unquote, detained yesterday. We're told that they've been taken into custody for immigration and identification problems. Apparently, they had fake ID on them, and their immigration status is in question. But over at JFK, a more serious incident took place yesterday. One man, said to be Middle Eastern, was arrested yesterday, and police say he had, or at least sources tell us, that he had a phony pilot certificate and and other phony ID on him. Now, this, even though that is the case, sources are telling us that he does not appear connected to Tuesday's terrorist action.
All takeoffs have been halted at New York's 3 airports. Yesterday, police detained 2 groups of suspects in New York. The Washington Post is reporting that both of these groups of men had knives, fake IDs, and open airline tickets dated Tuesday.
Federal authorities say after investigating the stories of the people that they arrested last night, they've been able to release most of them. Out of the 4 taken into custody at Kennedy Airport, they've released 3. One is still being held for further investigation. Now, what federal authorities are saying is that so many of their alarm bells went off last night that they felt it was imperative to storm the airplane with a SWAT team to take these people into custody and to order all flights in and out of New York shut down while they sorted out what they believed was 2 attempted hijackings. Now they say after a night of investigation, the confusion stemmed from the false ID. They've established that one man was using his brother's identification. The man was claiming to be a pilot. Also, one of the individuals lived at an address in Boston that showed up in the FBI's database as the address of another suspected terrorist. The 4 men at LaGuardia Airport, whose luggage was marked as if they were members of an airline crew, have told a story that they were on their way to a conference of airline manufacturers, and they've been able to corroborate some of that. So what they're now saying is what appeared to them to be 2 attempted hijackings and 2 groups of terrorists may now have checked out to be a series of extremely unlikely coincidences at a time when they were geared up to be extremely careful. So they're still sorting through this.
For those of us here in New York, it was one of the scariest things we could have ever heard, and that is that yesterday, 10 people arrested at LaGuardia and John F. Kennedy airports trying to sneak onto planes with knives, dressed as pilots. As it turns out, those reports were simply false. What happened? Well, apparently, there were just a number of coincidences. First of all, there were a number of passengers going to a Boeing conference, you know, Boeing, the big plane maker, and authorities, rightly sort of looking out for anything that might be suspicious, see all these United Airlines stickers. They see other sort of inside airplane kind of paraphernalia on their luggage, and they get suspicious. They arrest them thinking that they are phony. It turns out they weren't. Second, we heard about a pilot who had tried to board the plane. Well, that's true. A pilot tried to board the plane, and he did have identification for somebody else. That other person was his brother, who lived in Boston. Apparently, his brother had an address that at one point was linked to some suspicious characters, meaning some people who were considered potential terrorists. And he is still being detained to sort that out, to sort out the issue of what is this business about his brother's pilot's license. But it was certainly not a group of 4 or 5 getting onto each plane with knives, as some had initially thought. Senator Joseph Biden was on the Today Show talking about this about half an hour ago.
The reports this morning are erroneous in terms of who was arrested, what they had in their possession, and why they were arrested. I've spoken at length with the FBI and the CIA, and the truth of the matter is there were no box cutters, there were no knives. What happened was there were people who were now doing the right thing. We're checking the name and the bag and the name of the bag. Anybody didn't have the same, that doesn't mesh, then they get pulled off a flight. We now are doing things relating to the backgrounds on people who are on planes. We pull people off of planes. The one guy that got arrested is a guy who was acting out, some screwball who was acting out but he did not possess knives or box cutters or any of those.
There was nobody.
When they get to the airport, one guy shows up, and airline counter people feel that they recognize them as people who tried to fly on Tuesday. The names don't match, but they believe that these are the same group that tried to fly on Tuesday, the day that planes were crashed into the buildings. So they alert authorities. Then when they investigate one of these individuals, he has identification, and he says he's a pilot. But when they examine his pilot identification, it's under a different name. Now they have a man with multiple identities who the airline people are suspicious of. Another individual volunteers to members of the airline crew who are short-staffed to act as a crew member on the flight, claiming that he's an airline employee from L.A., but not an employee of that airline. So that, against the backdrop of later, when they're on higher alert, 4 men at LaGuardia show up with baggage that identifies them as part of an airline crew. So one thing led to another, led to another. Of course, some of these people had already boarded the plane in the case of Kennedy Airport, which was stormed by a Port Authority police SWAT team backed up by FBI agents from the terrorist task force who arrested 2 men and a woman and questioned them through the night. And it turns out the man who claims he was a pilot actually is a pilot under the name on his pilot identification. But the identification he used to get on the flight was that of a relative. So between the multiple IDs, the false name, which turns out to belong to somebody who he's related to, the fact that airline employees thought that this was the same group that had tried to check in on Tuesday, that were now using different identities, this set off a snowball effect, which caused airspace to be shut down and federal authorities to react in a very serious way, which I think, in all fairness, is very understanding, given the level of coincidence here. Yet one more on the pile is one of the individuals had an address, which in federal databases was the same address of a suspected terrorist that surfaced in this investigation as a name to be looked at.
Authorities were early on in the night that they thought they had foiled a couple of more hijackings. They no longer believe that because they've let these people go.
They believed last night, when they conducted these raids, handcuffed these people, and took them into custody, that they had 2 additional cells of people who were going to use the same MO, again because of the false identification, the claims of being airline personnel, and the fact that they were together but sat separately in different parts of the aircraft. All of this made them very suspicious.
The misinformation yesterday was a cause of real concern. Same thing was true about the alleged arrest last night and information about box cutters and knives, and none of which was verified by the police or the FBI, all of which was publicized, all of which turns out now to be untrue. So if we could all be a little bit more patient and verify the information before we put it out.
Bryant, there were reports throughout the night and into this morning that there was an aborted hijacking attempt at John F. Kennedy Airport. These reports are just simply not true. There were 2 incidents that occurred. Everyone who was stopped and taken into custody in a rather violent manner by FBI SWAT team members have been released. Those incidents were not related to the Tuesday crash.
Now, at first, it was thought that these could potentially be attempts to hijack airplanes. We now know that is not the case, that these were 10 perfectly innocent people, federal officials tell us today, who were simply caught up in the very, very cautious atmosphere, as understandably cautious atmosphere, as commercial airline service goes. Now, here's what happened. First, the first domino that fell last night, a man who is an actual pilot wanted to get on a plane in New York, a transcontinental flight to California. He was just going to be a passenger. He had his identification, but for reasons we don't fully understand at this point, he also had his brother's identification with him. Now, here is the amazing coincidence. His brother, this pilot's brother, once lived at an address in Boston that was also once used by some suspected associates of terrorist groups.
John, just as you were making your way from one ABC News building to the other, I told people there was a measure of relaxation now in the general intelligence community, because after this great disconnect last night between New York and Washington, the FBI, at least, appears a good deal calmer about those incidents at Kennedy and LaGuardia that so many federal officials last night were reporting.
Indeed, today, what's odd is some of the initial investigators who started the ball rolling on this and learned in the early stages about the multiple identities, the connections from addresses to other terrorists, are still concerned that, you know, there's part of this story that they didn't get. But the federal agents who worked through the night to carefully backtrack and verify these stories are satisfied that what looked to them like a set of 2 hijacking attempts and a coordinated effort is actually not that at all.
There are just 2 more things, neither one of them small. In those initial official reports last night, there were mentions that these people on the aircraft at Kennedy particularly had weapons, and there was, I believe, a specific reference to box cutters.
No box cutters.
No box
Specifically,
cutters.
knives was what was in the reports.
Knives, you're quite right. And do we believe that now not to be the case?
We believe that now not to be the case, and we tried to sort through that confusion too. And we got some help from Pierre Thomas at the Justice Department, who says
our Pierre Thomas, yeah.
Our Pierre Thomas at the Justice Department, who covers the Justice Department and the FBI for us, says that in sorting through the bags, since one of these individuals identified himself as an airline employee, his bags may have been mixed in with crew bags, and things they found in bags that didn't belong to these individuals may have been credited to them. So that's still a little foggy to me.
We are responding to numerous calls from the airports to reiterate what the mayor has already told you. The reporting that has been going on all night, I can definitively tell you, is inaccurate. We were out at both airports last evening. We did talk to approximately a dozen individuals. We have only one individual left who is still being questioned by the task force. All other 10 have been released and have been on their way.
Barry, can you tell us what happened at the airport specifically? How many people were detained? For how long were they detained? What were the reasons for the detention?
They were detained for a number of hours, but I would be quick to point out that they were cooperative with law enforcement.
Two-part question.
Is it correct that one of the
have been called
false ID as a pilot, and is he the one still being held?
Again, it's, as I mentioned earlier, this criminal investigation. I'm not going to get into the details. All I will tell you is there is one individual that was detained. He is still with us. He's voluntarily with us. We're continuing to run out a lot of things. Subsequently, there may be charges. I'm not sure at this point, or he may be released.
Apparently, 4 people, 3 men and 1 woman, detained at JFK yesterday who were removed from an LA-bound plane by gunpoint, then had, because their identities didn't check out, were apparently cleared. Their identities checked out, and they were also cleared of having any involvement whatsoever in Tuesday's hijacking and kamikaze attacks here in New York, Washington, and outside of Pittsburgh. But one man who apparently is a pilot, but was apparently flying under his brother's name because of a mix-up, he was in fact arrested. According to police, he was arrested for being belligerent. 5 men detained here at LaGuardia Airport yesterday also have apparently checked out. This after they were detained because their identifications did not initially check out.
We should also update some of the developments in New York, because we do want to discuss what came out of a lot of those reports which we had earlier this morning, saying that people were arrested, they had knives, and impersonating pilots. It seems now, as this is sorting itself out, it seems a lot less sinister. All but one of those people who were detained in New York has been released, and the FBI...
That's of about a dozen people.
Yeah, there was a dozen people. Right. Only one person still being questioned, and we should stress that that person is still being questioned at this time, and now authorities there are saying reports that they had knives in particular turned out not to be true.
In the intensive hunt for suspects, the arrest of several men at 2 New York airports was initially seized upon as a possible breakthrough. Within hours, though, the authorities said the suspects, all of Middle Eastern origin, had been cleared of any connection with Tuesday's attacks. All but one had been released.
New York City airports reopened today after a dozen detained people have been cleared of suspicion. There's one person at last report still being detained.
The New York area's 3 major airports reopened just a short time ago. That after it was determined there were no new attempts to hijack planes yesterday at Kennedy and LaGuardia airports.
Okay, now let me just ask you one other question, Pierre, for the moment about the incidents in New York last night, which so alarmed authorities at every level here while it was going on, and then which the FBI had some rethinking about overnight as it got closer and closer to the information. What is its current status? How many people of the 10 who were arrested at LaGuardia and New York are still being held at LaGuardia and Kennedy?
Well, Peter, we think only about 3, and there's one person in particular that they still are somewhat interested in. This is the person who was a pilot. He came on board with a relative's identification. They were a little bit surprised by that. They couldn't understand that. They continued to interview him, but a source I talked to just an hour ago said that they do not think that they will be able to hold him much longer as well, Peter.
This morning, the American networks were reporting that those being held had been planning 2 more raids and had been carrying knives and fake IDs like the attackers on Tuesday. It was a sensational story, but it wasn't true.
We're going to be picking up people around the world and in this country who we may find have had connections to this organization. But it's a very different thing than picking them up with what was reported, that there was a second round of World Trade Tower, Pentagon type attacks about to take place. There is no evidence of that whatsoever.
Last night's scare that closed New York City's 3 airports has now abated. Most of the 10 persons detained and suspected of possibly being 2 new suicide teams have been released.
Meantime, the investigation intensifies. Authorities continue to hold the man arrested at LaGuardia Airport last night. He was carrying false ID, posing as a pilot. But others taken in for questioning at New York area airports yesterday have been cleared of any connection with the terrorist attack.
Meantime, authorities are relieved to report that some confusion led to the 3 New York area airports being closed last night, that it was nothing more than that. More than 10 individuals were detained but eventually released.
Of course, Gary, last night it looked like they had foiled a couple of attempted hijackings. Of course, that turned out to be not the case.
Things do change.
The New York airports remain closed until noon today because of 4 separate incidents, resulting in the questioning of a dozen passengers who were held but never officially arrested and finally released.
I heard stomping, everybody down, everybody heads down.
John Weinbach was in the middle of one of those incidents on a New York jet scheduled to take off for Los Angeles last night when police stormed the plane, handcuffing one passenger, wrestling another to the center aisle.
You can't fault them for, being on the ready. It was just frightening.
It appeared that there were a number of arrests. Turns out one may have been the case, a number of detainees, and a lot of misinformation surrounding that situation.
The information that the FBI has what it calls a material witness and has issued an arrest warrant for that material witness. Our rock-solid reporter in Washington, Jim Stewart, reports that that material witness is believed to be in New York. Now, there's no name, no further information. For one thing, it's sealed, under court seal.
Now, for the past couple of days, Brian, FBI officials have been telling us they've made no arrests. Well, now that has changed. We're told the first arrest has been made in New York. We don't know who. The person was arrested on what's called a material witness warrant. What this tells us is that the officials, the FBI, does not have any evidence at this point to indicate that the person they've arrested was guilty or was a conspirator was somehow involved in the bombing. But they want to hold this person. They believe this person has more information.
Pierre?
Yes, Peter, we've just been giving the following information by the Justice Department. A material witness warrant has been issued for a suspect in the investigation. Let me explain what a material witness warrant is. That is a warrant that is issued when it's demonstrated that a person has information that is highly relevant to a criminal investigation and when there is a risk of flight, a high risk of flight, Peter. Again, this has just come out. A material witness warrant has been issued. We're checking now to see if this person is in custody, and if so, where. Peter, we now have additional information on that material witness arrest warrant, which has been issued. We're being told by sources that the person who has been arrested has links to a relative of Osama bin Laden. There's no information that this person was involved in the attack, but because of that link to Osama bin Laden's relative and other links, they do feel that this person has highly relevant information, and they also say that they feel that he is a risk of fleeing the country.
Did they tell you where this material witness is at the moment?
Yes, he's being held in New York. The additional information we have is that he's one of the people detained at JFK yesterday, Peter.
Exactly. Thanks, Pierre Thomas. I wanted you to add that so that we could go to John Miller here. John, this is all part and parcel of these 2 incidents last night, one at Kennedy and one at LaGuardia Airport, which totally spooked the authorities here, which we reported for much of the evening, and then the FBI got kind of anxious about this morning.
Yeah, they dialed back on it this morning and released most of the suspects, but they've held on to this one individual. Today, at a press conference by the Port Authority police, they explained their rationale behind the raid and so on. And when they said they'd released all but one, they were pressed by reporters, why are you holding the one you're holding? And they were very circumspect, only saying, we have sufficient grounds to hold that person. and that apparently relates to what Pierre is talking about.
Do you know anything more about the basis on which they're holding him?
Well, this was what we were told was one of the things that set off big alarm bells, which is, they ran a lot of information through databases, and apparently the address he used up in Massachusetts is an address that was resided at by a Osama bin Laden brother who resides here in the United States. And of course, that raised everybody up, and they're trying to investigate beyond the address. Is there any personal connection?
Do we know that he had a fake ID when he tried to get on that aircraft last night? Or actually when he did get on the aircraft?
Yeah, and it's one of those things that is actually reversed. He had a fake ID that he presented to get on the aircraft, and then under questioning he produced a pilot's license, but the name on the pilot's license was different, and he explained that the false ID he was using was a relative of his, but that the pilot's license was his real name. And it turns out he really is trained and really is a pilot, but the identity he used to get on the flight is not his name.
A couple of other things. The one person that we heard about arrested tonight on the material witness warrant is one of the men who got into the altercation yesterday and caused the shutdown of the airports in New York, LaGuardia, JFK, and Newark. He is a person who had some disparity in his identification papers. He's been very unwilling to talk to investigators. The FBI thinks he knows more than he's saying. They can't prove that. They don't know that for sure, and that's why he's being held on a material witness warrant. It allows them to arrest him without charging him with a crime.
ABC correspondent John Miller has been staying on top of the investigation. So much has happened, John. Just bring us up to date. Where are things now? Just what do we know?
Well, right now in the case, Barbara, they have their first arrest. Now, that's a much better headline than it is a story. A man who federal authorities refuse to identify has been charged as a material witness. He was arraigned today in federal court in White Plains in a sealed proceeding. The papers that detail what he's a witness to or what they hope to glean from him are also sealed in secret. But the judge did order him detained and held, so he is in federal custody tonight.
Well, yesterday when there were the reports of people in New York airports, one wearing a uniform, supposedly, trying to be a pilot, and we heard about all of these different people. All of that's just gone away, those people?
Well, all of those people have been released, but for one. They spent a long night at Kennedy Airport trying to sort out through a series of unlikely stories. Some of the incredible things that set off alarm bells in that case were, one of the passengers tried to board the plane with identification that was false. It was not his. He claimed it was a relative's. That actually checked out. At the same time, he produced a pilot's license, which had a different name on it, which actually that name turned out to be his. So he's posing as somebody he's not, then he's identifying himself as someone he is as a pilot, which also checked out. He had had flight training also in Florida, where the other hijackers had trained. And then add to that, one of the subjects gave an address in Massachusetts, which, are you sitting down?
Yep.
Was the address of Osama bin Laden's brother, which only made them about twice as much suspicious as they were before. So at that point they said, everybody stop. They separated them. They interrogated in different rooms. The men taken into custody at LaGuardia were released as a result of a mix-up. Their bags were labeled that they were airline employees when they weren't, but they said these were keepsakes they collected at aeronautic conferences they attended. The Kennedy Airport people were released, except for the one who had that very coincidental address. They're still looking at him.
Well, at least they're trying, aren't they?
But last night they were operating on a very dark assumption that somehow they had two new cells.
Yeah, everybody was something really seriously has happened.
So much so that they invaded an aircraft with a SWAT team, that they closed air traffic in New York at all three airports, including one that wasn't even involved in the incidents. It took them a long time to get that sorted out. But this morning, as they kind of lined up the coincidence that gave them that thinking, it was with some relief. Even so, they're still operating on the premise that this may not be over, that they have other names, and that there could be other teams out there that they want to find.
A man in New York that got involved in that closing down of the three airports yesterday, who showed up to take a flight. He had some improper documentation with him that officials couldn't account for. They began to question him, but his answers weren't very forthcoming, and they've decided simply to serve him with a material witness warrant, which gives them power to hold him on the belief that he has information that could be helpful to the investigation.
The investigation is unfolding at a nice pace, but there are a number of daunting things that they face. Number one, they're looking for these 100 people who may have information about the attack. That's going to take some time. One source described that many of these people involved with this case are masters of diversion, many false IDs, so that will take considerable time. But they are finding that there's footprints of Osama bin Laden at different places in connection with the case. In fact, one of the people they detained yesterday is a person who had links to a relative of Osama bin Laden, and that is one of the reasons why they are holding that person as a material witness in this investigation, Ted.
The Justice Department and law enforcement officials now telling us there were 4 separate incidents at JFK and LaGuardia airports Thursday night in which 12 men and 1 woman were taken into custody. Now the feds are telling us one of those people was arrested on a material witness warrant. Who that person is or what they know, we don't know. Well, despite all of that, things are starting to get back to normal here at JFK and other New York City airports, as normal as things can be after being attacked by terrorists who hijacked 4 airplanes and killed thousands of Americans. Air traffic is continuing to pick up. However, the terminals are still quite bare. Airport buses are up and running, but most are running around nearly empty. Surprisingly, most of the people we spoke to didn't seem too concerned about flying. They just want to get home or go on vacation, wherever they're headed. One man I spoke to was trying to get home to Israel. Said he'd had a tough week. Told me he'd been to the World Trade Center on Tuesday morning. He went to the top. He came back down and was walking away. Then he heard an explosion. At JFK International Airport, Todd Connor, Fox News.
Tonight from New York, go inside Ground Zero with John Walsh. It's all part of a 2-hour America's Most Wanted investigation.
Tonight on an America's Most Wanted special presentation.
Tonight you're going to see something that nobody else has seen. And tonight it's all about justice, because we need your help to catch the bastards who did this.
In the days that followed, events unfolded fast and furiously. Officials announced they had identified the 19 terrorists on the planes and went looking for another 118 people who might have pertinent information. One man in New York was arrested as a material witness. An arrest came from as far away as Germany. So far, a total of 25 have been arrested worldwide. While at New York airports, anyone even remotely suspicious was yanked off of planes.
Move back. There have been a number of people detained at the airports, one of which I understand was in fact arrested. He had identification indicating he was a pilot. He attempted to clear security, and he was stopped. The identification he had was in fact false. I understand he has been arrested. There are other people that have been detained.
As agents begin to win the battle of solving this case, they continue to seek help from you.
That's where you come in. We know who many of Osama bin Laden's associates are. Some are in this country. We don't know how many may have been involved in the attack. But we do know you can help take these wanted fugitives off the streets tonight.
We are looking for at least 3 suspected terrorists with ties to bin Laden. They may know something about the recent attacks. Aman al-Zawahiri is believed to be Osama bin Laden's doctor and is wanted for his alleged role in the 1998 U.S. Embassy bombings in East Africa. Muhsin Musa Matwali Atwa is also wanted for his alleged involvement in the 1998 U.S. Embassy bombings. And Khaled Shaikh Mohammed is wanted for conspiring to bomb 12 U.S. airliners flying over the Pacific Ocean in 1995. If you know anything about these cases, please call 1-800-CRIME-TV.
Let's go take a look back. Mary Murphy looked at the bombing in 1993 and other acts of terrorism since.
February 26, 1993 is the day foreign terror blasted New York into a new reality. Within a week, the FBI had the undercarriage of the Ryder rental van that carried the bomb and its first suspect in New Jersey, a Palestinian named Mohammed Salameh, and then another Palestinian. Within months, the group would be linked to a much larger conspiracy. The Sheikh was later convicted of plotting attacks on the UN and bridges and tunnels linking New York and New Jersey.
And again, America and humanity is vulnerable to terrorism as we lost the World Trade Center today.
You know, the one story about 911, there's a lot of stuff you can hear about 911, but all you need to know about 911 and the fact that what we've been told is a lie is the personal testimony of William Rodriguez.
It's a bomb, it's a bomb. But why is he saying that? Because he survived the bomb of 1993.
Most of you who come across this film already know that 9/11 was a false flag attack, but only few authors and filmmakers under limited books and documentaries have demonstrated Israeli involvement.
Our purpose was to document the event.
But was the 1993 World Trade Center bombing also a false flag attack?
Couldn't believe the FBI would basically tell him to build the bomb, give him real detonators.
Is it possible there could have been Israeli involvement in it too? Or was it a legitimate radical Islamic attack, as what the official theories of the 9/11 Commission report states, as it's also known to be the first Islamic attack in our country? How and when did radical Islam begin? Reality couldn't be further from the truth when fundamental figures that influence radical Islamic terrorists are not only connected to the 1993 bombing, but are inherently connected to what later was known as Al-Qaeda. But like 9/11, this does not throw out any possible Israeli and Western involvements for the 93 bombing.
I made a film called 6 on 77, the Dulles Airport 9/11 cover-up, regarding anomalies about the amount and identities with the hijackers who boarded and commandeered Flight 77 into the Pentagon, using a collection of news reports between the days following 9/11 to the initial release of the Dulles CCTV security video in July of 2004. I also address other 9/11 truth researchers' claims about the Dulles security video lacking authenticity, who suggested the recordings may be altered, fake, or recorded during a previous dry run, since the security system features does not display a timestamp in video format. To vindicate that the recordings are indeed security video at the airport gates capturing hijackers on 9/11, I demonstrate that Flight 77 passenger Marie Ray Soper had already been identified in the video, and is first seen amongst the two hijackers, Khalid al-Madar and Moked Mojed, entering after having gone through metal detectors, and while she was picking up her cat in a pink pet carrying cage. Besides also bringing clarity about the initial release with the two Dulles videos through Associated Press, and now that there is only one camera angle available publicly through the Zacharias Moussaoui trial exhibit, since having made 6 on 77 in 2017, I've acquired a bit more at Dulles Airport.